The Friday night dump. It's not what you think. Definitely not that.
Wow.
The Friday night dump,
Soaking wet dump.
also known in more polite circles as taking out the trash day, is a tried and tested public relations strategy that's existed since the dawn of time.
This is amazing!
Well, almost. It hit the big time when it scored its very own West Wing episode.
Let's take out the trash day.
Friday.
I mean, what is it?
Any stories we have to give the press that we're not wild about, we give them all in a lump on Friday.
It really is a simple strategy. Dump all the bad news, the stuff you want swept under the rug, late on a Friday. The logic being that the bad news will be buried as everyone has mentally clocked off for the weekend. If you leave it late enough, you can even miss the nightly news cycle altogether. It doesn't necessarily need to be a Friday either. If you have bad news to dump, timing the release with higher profile news will do the trick also. For example, the death of a monarch or the AFL finals. Dropping bad news to coincide with high profile events almost all but guarantees you the least amount of coverage possible. And at the end of the day, that's the goal. If you think it's a strategy that's reserved for one side of politics, well...
You're living in a dreamland.
When National Cabinet made the decision to stop daily reporting of COVID data, guess which day the states chose to release their weekly update?
Friday.
The first week, the Victorian government took it to the next level,
Dump it.
waiting until almost 6 p.m. before issuing a vague press release that barely touched on the number of Victorians that had died since the last report. It was almost 7 p.m. on Friday before the Department of Health issued a tweet with additional data. I mean, that's about as poor as it gets. Another example from Victoria, the release of the 000 report that was provided to the Victorian government in August. The Minister for Emergency Services promised not to release the report on a Friday afternoon. Instead, the report was released on a Saturday at the start of the AFL finals. I guess she was true to her word.
The report into Victoria's emergency call service exposes deep failings, with 33 deaths associated with 000 and ambulance delays.
I am, of course, deeply sorry for the loss, your trauma, your grief.
There was no doubt that Esther was in crisis.
There are questions being asked as to why such a significant report was handed down on a weekend and why the Premier wasn't in attendance. Minister Symes says responding to this review is her responsibility.
It was a dump.
The report was grim reading, and it was pretty obvious why the government would want to try and bury it in the lead up to the election. Don't buy into the gaslighting that the timing couldn't be helped. The report itself had been with the government since the 5th of August. There'd been ample opportunity to release it prior to that Saturday. Then there was the Victorian government announcing that masks would no longer be mandatory, quietly releasing that on the lead into a long weekend. And despite health advice to the contrary being provided by the Chief Health Officer only a week or so prior, could have been some awkward questions there. Both sides of politics are guilty of the Friday night dump. Some classics of the genre from the New South Wales government include that time Gladys decided to announce that she wasn't going to hold daily COVID press conferences anymore.
So the weekend, Sunday will be the last day we officially do the press conferences in this way.
Despite it coming at a time when the whole response thing had clearly gotten out of her control. Then there was the time the New South Wales government quietly released a scathing report into Woolworths-controlled pubs and pokies late on a Friday night, when most people had already nicked off to the pub. The previous federal government also loved a Friday arvo dump. There was this report into the effectiveness of the COVID Safe app that the government had to be forced kicking and screaming to release. Or remember that time that the coalition government cancelled Novak Djokovic's visa?
Good evening. Just moments ago, the Immigration Minister has cancelled Novak Djokovic's visa.
Just in the last few minutes, that official statement has come out from Immigration Minister Alex Hawke, a decision some 4 days in the making. I have it here, let me read it to you. Today, I exercise my power under Section 133C3 of the Migration Act to cancel the visa held by Mr Novak Djokovic.
Then there's the Tudge, with the long-awaited Dr Vivian Tom report, which was released on a Friday afternoon. Back in Victoria though, the Victorian Health Minister has not exactly covered herself in glory since taking the reins. She's ignored health advice and she's taken to quietly dumping bad news. On the 21st of September, she revealed she'd received Independent Pandemic Management Advisory Committee reports plural, on the management of the pandemic, but she effectively signalled that she'd be sitting on their release. Thomas has been sitting on the reports for a month now. I'd expect that the reports contain quite a bit of material the government would prefer not to make a fuss over in the lead up to an election, so I'm more than curious to see how Marianne Thomas chooses to go about their release. The Friday news dump is about as unsavoury as the name would suggest. Pay attention to what drops from any government on a Friday afternoon, because you can all but guarantee that that's the juicy stuff that they really don't want to talk about, but are required to release nonetheless.